Montgomery Board of Education was a tremendous moment for the fight for civil rights. To say, did it end the problem of segregated schools? No.
The force of the law was not sufficient to change the hearts and minds of people.
It was a historic court case in 1954 that began a fight for justice. Every morning in the 1950s, young schoolgirl Linda Brown endured the cruelties of segregation. She was forced to walk a long and dangerous route to the poor-quality, entirely black Monroe Elementary in Topeka, Kansas. When her father asked her to be transferred to the closer, all-white Sumner Elementary, his request was rejected due to Kansas segregation laws which racially segregated students in schools. Thurgood Marshall, George Hayes, and James Nabrett of the NAACP took up this case and the injustices that occurred in 4 other cases around the country. The plaintiffs brought the issue to the Supreme Court and firmly stood for their children's and all minority children's rights to a quality education.
Brown was about so much more than just ending segregation. It was really about the principle that separate opportunities for different racial groups is inherently unequal.
Their efforts were successful, and the United States Supreme Court unanimously declared that America's schools needed to integrate at all deliberate speed.
Those cases really changed the fabric of our laws and also changed the way we are able to interact in society.
At first, in the 1950s and 1960s, there was a great deal of backlash. Schools would shut down, and states would claim massive resistance to integration.
Also in the South came the rise of the Seg Academy. White communities would just set up private schools, simultaneously starting up their own schools and at the same time working to defund the public school system.
But eventually in some areas, desegregation plans began. Integrated school districts saw many benefits, including class diversity, helping students collaborate with those different from them.
For the first time in my life, I had white friends to realize the commonality that you have, that at the core, you have more in common than you have that's different. I was more comfortable going to schools for college that were, well known.
But soon, the positive integration process that took place for the 30 years after Brown v. Board of Education began to erode. Schools resegregated, creating a sequence of limited opportunities for minorities and an unequally educated society of future American citizens. School resegregation stemmed from the court's failure to follow through with the promise of desegregation made in Brown v. Board. This was shown in the 1974 court case of Milliken v. Bradley.
I think Milliken is one of the most momentous decisions ever that ended our work towards school integration. Milliken is a case out of Detroit, and it was a case where the plaintiffs sued the state of Michigan saying that the city of Detroit has segregated schools and the remedy for this has to be an inter-district remedy. And the court said no. The Supreme Court said that because it's Detroit that is running the segregated school system, you can't have a remedy that requires things of one of these outlying towns, even though the state is the entity that is ultimately responsible for many of the public policy choices that led to this segregated situation.
This led to a legal culture that was quickly becoming against school integration. The next mandate established an order called unitary status.
Once the court is persuaded that your system is no longer segregated, then the school system or the plaintiffs too can petition the court for a declaration of unitary status. Unitary status means you have a unitary school system. You're no longer running a system that is segregated, and that means the court is no longer overseeing the school system.
This allowed districts to send students back to neighborhood schools in segregated residential areas, leading to resegregated schools. In the 1950s and 60s, whites began to flee schools and neighborhoods in an action described as white flight.
People would say, oh, okay, you're gonna bus me and make me go to school with black kids in this city? Fine, I'll move to the suburbs. There are no black people there. Why are there no black people there? Because of residential segregation.
When many white families abandoned neighborhoods and schools, they become de facto segregated.
So they were segregated in fact, even though the law didn't always require them to be. We still have a lot of residential segregation.
Enthusiasm towards desegregating schools evaporated and was replaced by a misconception, still present today. Integration has already succeeded. In a 2004 survey, 63% of whites thought the education system was equal, while only 31% of African Americans agreed. Because of this, many have begun to neglect integration initiatives, believing they are unnecessary.
People don't want to talk about integration. They think, oh, that's such a 60s thing or a 70s thing. It's kind of like this secret sauce that nobody wants to use because we can't seem to be able to achieve it.
When students go to segregated schools, they cannot see others' perspectives on life and do not interact with other races. As adults, they can believe harmful stereotypes that impede integration.
If you don't grow up encountering people of different backgrounds, you can develop biases or stereotypes about that community. And I've had people say to me that I only was able to achieve that educational success because I'm Black.
I'm at this meeting in a basement in Alabama, and this one woman, this white lady from the junior league, she sits up and she says, why would we want to spend money on those kids when our kids still need more help? Now, what was telling me about that is, who are those kids and who are our kids? And as long as that lady can say there are those kids and then there are our kids, then we've lost.
The unknown becomes something to be feared. You begin to get to a level where you start seeing the other person as less than human in a way that I believe is dangerous.
Authorities rejected integration plans. Whites abandoned neighborhoods. Enthusiasm was replaced with ignorance and racism. America's schools were segregated once again.
In some places in this country, it doesn't look like we have a system where kids can go to school with each other.
In aspects of resources and achievement, many schools are now left separate and unequal. Good instructors are an amazing foundation to student success.
Good teachers matter more than anything. And if you have a bad teacher, it's over.
And, in predominantly minority-populated schools, teachers are 1.5 times less likely to be experienced. In 2015, Normandy, Missouri, a mostly African-American school district, some students only had one teacher who taught an entire academic lesson in a whole school day. The resource gap gives way to an even larger, more infamous racial disproportionality in education, the achievement gap.
The achievement gap is just basically a fact, which is that Black and Latino kids on average don't score as well, get as high grades in school as white kids do.
During the 1970s, after 17 years of integration efforts, the achievement gap had dropped by half.
Everyone is going to all the schools, right? Then everybody cares about all the schools. And then there's lots of investment and support and pulling for all the schools.
But the achievement gap has been greatly existed in recent American education. In 2015, of New York's white graduates, 60.5% met or exceeded the qualification score on an AP exam. African American graduates, 5.1% met or exceeded. As schools remain racially separate, the achievement gap continues to exist as a reminder of the educational inequality for students of different races.
Education can be a tool to help students escape a life of poverty.
But as education is resegregated, many minorities continue to repeat their parents' history of living in poverty.
I did have friends who were African American who started with me in that Magnet Gifted program, who then opted out of it for high school. Those students maybe started college but didn't finish.
Many students are condemned to fall behind in class and can have trouble getting accepted to college. This leads to less preparation for the real world, a vantage chance of finding a well-paying job, and a lifetime of poverty. The Brown family took a stand for equality and justice, but their vision and fight for an equal education for all students was obstructed by court orders, white flight, racism, and the resource gap, leaving Brown's rulings only partially completed. These barriers to modern school integration are making the nation a place where only some citizens can get what they deserve out of education, and therefore, life.
We're a diverse country. We have lots of languages, lots of racial groups and ethnic groups, and we have to find a way to make this salad work. And if we can't, we're doomed. I believe education is the future.
Education is the future.
Education is the future.
Education is the future.
I believe that education is the future. What happened?